And a typical market hog operation, what he found that peak efficiency could reach at about 10,000 hogs marketed per year, which again would be considered a mid-sized family farm. So the big question then was, why? Why are we losing these mid-sized farms when they're in fact more efficient or as efficient as the big farms? And I never understood the answer to that question until it was about, I don't know, 2 or 3 years after that. And Rich Neters, who was at that, he's retired now, but he was at that time the president and CEO of the Cisco Corporation, which you all know is not a mom and pop operation. And Rich Neters was interested in these mid-sized farms because in his company, the increase in markets was these highly differentiated food products. And the very small farms who were doing farmers markets, CSAs, etc., couldn't meet the demand, the kind of volume that he needed for the Cisco Corporation. And so he was very concerned about the continuing loss of these farms. And so he called a meeting in Marshalltown, Iowa, which is just about 20 miles from where I live. And I was invited to the meeting. And he brought together a group of farmers, people from the food processing business and retail food system, etc. And we spent a day together and to try to deal with this question of what could we do in order so that these mid-sized farms would still be available in the marketplace to serve companies like Cisco. And then at dinner that evening, I happened to sit next to one of the head meat marketers of Cargo. And so he turned to me at one point at dinner and he said, "So what do you think is the future of family farms?" And I said, "Well, if we don't do anything different than we've done, give it another 10 years or so, and most of them will be gone." And he said, "I think you're right." And I said, "Well, what about the big farms?" And I said, "Well, as long as they continue to learn how to operate on thinner margins and get larger, they'll probably be okay, but eventually they're going to have to be in trouble as well." And then he turned to me and he said, "I think you're right. As a matter of fact, we can't make a profit selling to Walmart anymore." And I turned to him and I said, "Wait a minute, you're Cargo." And he said, "Yeah, but he said, you don't understand how it works." And he wasn't singling out Walmart. He was talking about the concentration at the retail level. And so he said, when a company like Walmart needs a new product, they'll want 7 or 8 of us, those of us who can provide them with the amount of that kind of product that they need on a consistent basis, and then say give us the best price. So we will each sharpen our pencils because we don't want to lose our contact that, and we'll give them the best price we can,
different voices,
saving some reasonable margins for ourselves. And then he said they will select 3 of us, and then come back to us and they'll say, "Now you're going to run and not give us your real price." And then he said, "We can't cut our margins anymore, so the only thing we can do is to reduce our transaction costs." And he said, "The easiest way for us to do that is to just buy some of the biggest farmers. Because as he put it, he said, it's cheaper for us to buy 10,000 hogs from one farmer than to buy 1,000 hogs from 10 farmers, so that's what we have to do." So there's the answer to the question. So, getting back to your point, so what do we do about that? I mean, this is how it's evolving. Well, one of the things that a number of us have been sponsoring in the United States is what we call our Agricultural Delivery Project. And that is because one of the things that can do, and there's a lot of evidence of this now that it works, is to have these mid-sized farmers aggregate together into marketing networks, have their own brand, and pool their product, and bring it into the marketplace. And then they can reduce their transaction costs in a similar way that a big farmer can. But they can still have the advantage of remaining a smaller farm with the kind of flexibility that smaller farmers have, and still reduce their transaction costs. So I think that's an option which we have. And again, here is where I think public policy could be helpful to provide capital, etc. And there are some, like in the United States, there's a program called the Producer Value Added Grant Program, where producers who want to get together and do these kinds of things, they can get up to $500 million to do feasibility studies and business plans, etc. It's a great program. Those kinds of programs can help to do this. But we also need people, this again, where communities become important. We need people on the ground, working with farmers and help them to put those kinds of systems together. But I think in the long run, that's the solution to the issue that you're raising, because what you're talking about is producing these kinds of unique products at a scale that you feel comfortable with and that works for you, but you have to become part of the network. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, it's not my. Marketing hasn't been the problem at all. It's more. I would like to see a holistic way to organically grow grain. It's not exciting. That's my one part that I don't like about what we're doing. Is provide local commercial grain.
I think I'm getting it. So let me be clear. So there's what we're envisioning now is 3 different sectors in the marketplace. There's your specialty direct market, and that's what I'm hearing you say. That's what you're doing, and you want to keep doing, and that's fine. That works. And then there's the undifferentiated commodity markets at the other end. The market in the middle is what I'm talking about, and this is another opportunity for farmers who want to do what you're doing, but do it at a scale that is more appropriate to what they want to do, and then be able to serve markets like the Cisco Corporation, for example. And in order to do that, they have to aggregate into marketing networks. And again, there are a lot of examples. There's Organic Valley Family Farms, who started in 1988 with 8 farmers. They're now at 1,700 farmers and approaching $700 million annual gross sales. And their farmers are getting almost twice the amount for their milk as conventional large farmers are because of that aggregation and the way in which they manage their system. There's Shepherd's Grain out on the West Coast, which is a group of grain farmers, and they've done the same thing, aggregate together. They're mostly, what we would call mid-sized farmers, and they have developed these partnership relationships with millers and bakers, and they all get together in the fall of the year before the farmers ever plant a bushel of wheat, and they agree based on, with the help of an extension specialist from Iowa State University, they come to an agreement about what the cost of producing wheat and that growing cycle is going to be, and then they guarantee that price to the farmer, regardless of what happens in the marketplace. And these kind of partnership relationships work, and they work for those mid-sized farmers. But for the farmers for whom the direct marketing works, sure, of course, that's what they are doing. That's what I'm hearing what you're doing, and that's great.
What I understand Janine's issue, though, is that they're doing the livestock end beautifully, but they require inputs of grain to do that. And they're considering whether it's buying the grain or growing it themselves. Is there a way for them to do grain, whether it's themselves or someone else, in a way that's not involving the tillage and the fossil fuels and the calorie era kind of process? If there's a way of feeding the animals that need grain off of grain that they can actually raise or get someone else to raise in a more in a fashion that doesn't involve the kinds of things that, as holistic management people, they're not so friendly with, like tillage, for instance, and do that in a way that would work for them.
Okay, I'm sorry. So your question really was around the livestock primarily. Yeah.
Well, and they grow livestock that beautifully, but some of them need grain. They grow chickens, they grow turkeys.
Yeah. Well, and that's a different kind of question in terms of how you put that kind of system together. And, I think that feeding grain to livestock is not going to be, it's going to be one of those collapsed systems into the future. I just don't see how that's going to continue to work. So I think that we're going to see going to a more.
I guess what I'm wondering is there any other kind of permaculture ideas around feeding a large number of livestock that can be? I think he might have something to say.
There's a man in Australia named Colin Cease, and he's innovated a system called pasture cropping. And in Australia, it takes on a 5-year rotation, and basically uses a combination of every 5 years you'll select a different, well, every year you select a different paddock that you're going to grow grain in, essentially. And through a series of crash grazing at very specific times, you weaken the grass sufficiently so that you can actually plant grain into it, which gives the grain an advantage for that season. And then that grain can be used directly on farm, so you're not harvesting nutrient from another farm. It's basically staying on farm. And then at the end of the season, you either crash graze the grain with the animals that require the grain, or you harvest it and store it so that you can use it in whatever livestock you need. And typically what he does is he cuts it really high, so now you have a combination of chaff and hay growing simultaneously. The hay would be weaker than the chaff, whatever grain you have grown. And you crash graze that again at the end of the season, and that is out of grain for another 5 years. So speaking to Joel Salatin last year at a conference, he's actually working on that system right now, but because he doesn't have 2 seasons like they have in Australia, so in Australia the grain is grown in their winter as opposed to, so the grazing happens in the summer, the grain is grown in the winter. For us, we have to graze the pasture that we wanted to grow grain on really hard before planting, multiple times before the grain is planted, and then once again before first fruit true leaf. And then that paddock is out of production for grazing for that season, essentially. So I have a website here, Colin Cease, which has some of that information. It'll have to be adapted for our climate. Yeah, so I'll give you the website.
Did that? Okay. Let me just add one other thing that I mentioned. One of the things on my farm, which I paid attention to right away, again, this wisdom from the past, Sir Robert Howard says that in natural systems there is no waste. And so we've always tried to look at our farming operation in terms of not having any waste. And, again, in the way many farms are operated, there's always some waste. When you harvest your grain and we always run it through a screen cleaner as it comes off the truck from the combine to screen off any broken kernels, shrunken kernels, anything that doesn't meet the quality standards for the market. We screen that off. Well, most people see that as a waste and they just, they put it in a landfill or whatever. As far as I was concerned, that was perfect feed for livestock. So we, in our operation, we do entirely, grass-based operation. We grow, of course, a lot of alfalfa to provide the nitrogen for our crops. Again, that's part of that. So the waste from the cropping system becomes feed for the livestock, and then the waste from the livestock, in that sense, the alfalfa is a waste that gets that is used to provide nitrogen for the crops. So you put those kinds of systems together where they complement each other. That, at least for us up to now, has been working. So again, I think it's trying to figure out how you create those synergies so that you transform what would normally be called waste into a usable product.